Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I'd just like to draw your attention to fire regulations, which are on the screen behind me and over there, I think. And please can you ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent or off. Councillors, can I remind you to speak directly into the microphone and make sure that your card is pushed firmly into the console. Members of the public, I would like to say that as a committee we understand that the matters under consideration tonight can be emotive, so please be respectful and refrain from any interruption whatsoever of the proceedings. And now we move to the main items of business. The minutes of the meeting, which took place on the 22nd of June 2015, have been laid on the table for the last 30 minutes. Are you content that I sign these as a correct record of that meeting? Agreed. Thank you. Emma, have there been any apologies for absence?
No apologies, Chairman.
And have the members declared any interest before the meeting?
None received, Chairman.
So, members, any other non-pecuniary or disclosable pecuniary interest to declare? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chair. I want to declare perhaps a non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 8.2, item A1, in as much that I am Waverley's representative on the Surrey Hills A&OB board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Seaborn.
Can I declare that I participated in the Bramley Parish Council planning session that considered item 8.3?
Thank you. And no others? So, Elizabeth, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that the committee should be should be aware of?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, there have been some relevant changes since your last meeting to update you on. Firstly, at the beginning of July, the government published its document Fixing the Foundations, Creating a More Prosperous Nation, as part of its growth agenda, and some members may have seen that document. This includes future proposed changes to the development control process, including the granting of automatic permission on brownfield land, and also the transferring of infrastructure applications that have an element of housing to the nationally significant infrastructure regime. These proposals are subject to further guidance from government, so they're not actually in force yet, but this is giving us heads up about what's likely to come on stream in the future. In addition, and with immediate effect, the government's threshold for measuring planning application performance has changed and been raised to require that no fewer than 50% from 40% of major applications should be determined outside the statutory determination period. Now, this performance target is the one that informs the poorly performing designation and the special measures regime. The proposal to bring minor developments into this performance regime is also proposed, and that is 1 to 9 dwellings and up to 1,000 square metres of commercial floor space. Just to confirm, at the moment this council performs very well on major applications, and our performance is up to 90% of majors being determined in the statutory time target. But it's clearly a very important target that we have to be mindful of going forward in terms of our determination of planning applications. A second important change that has followed a High Court judgment was received a couple of weeks ago. This was a judicial review by 2 local councils of the government's decision to change the policy and guidance on affordable housing and infrastructure last autumn. This change effectively raised the threshold to more than 10 dwellings before affordable housing or infrastructure contributions could be sought. The court decided that the government's actions were not lawful due to flawed procedure, including inadequate consultation. So the government guidance in the NPPG has been withdrawn. In respect of affordable housing, that means that this council can revert to applying policy H5 of the local plan, including asking for on-site affordable housing on rural settlement sites of 5 net new dwellings or more, or over 0.2 of a hectare. So clearly, for the time being, that's very good news for us. In relation to infrastructure, the NPPG changes to the pooling arrangements that took effect on the 6th of April will continue to apply, so that it is not practical to revert to applying the supplementary planning document PIC calculator as we used to on 1 to 10 dwellings. This is because all contributions since the 6th of April must be justified on a bespoke and case-specific basis and not exceed 5 obligations for any single piece of infrastructure. So given this, the infrastructure providers are only likely to seek contributions on major developments in order to maximise the contributions that they can achieve. There are no applications on tonight's agenda that require reassessment in the light of the affordable housing policy position. And in relation to planning infrastructure contributions, there are two items that are potentially affected, that is A1 and B1. But officers consider that the approach that is taken in these reports assessment remains valid. I hope that's helpful. Happy to take any questions. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I'm sorry, I omitted to ask Emma, have there been any questions received from members of the public, Emma?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So, on to item...
Do members have any questions on the...
Oh, thank you, yes. Do members have any questions on the updates on the guidance or legislation? No? Okay, on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the quarterly appeals report. Kat, would you like to present the report to the committee, please?
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just direct members to page 5 of the agenda. You'll see on the following pages there have been 2 appeal decisions received in the past quarter, one of which was a delegated decision and one of which was a determination by the Joint Planning Committee. Both of the appeals were dismissed. Firstly, on page 5, the application at Thrells on Rowley Drive in Cranley. This was an application for a dormer window on a rear elevation of a residential property. As you'll see in the 3rd column there, the inspector dismissed the application on the basis that the proposed development would result in a significant increase in the bulk of the roof of the dwelling. In the inspector's view, this would result in a disproportionate addition over and above the size of the original building, and the appeal was therefore dismissed on the basis of Greenbelt policies C1 and RD2. Turning over the page onto page 6, land at Penlyn and Garden Cottage, Cranley Road, Ewhurst. This was an application for 27 dwellings following demolition of 2 dwellings on a greenfield site. The main issues for this application focused on the harm to the character and appearance of the area, together with the layout and pattern of development proposed. The inspector dismissed the application. Subsequent to that application, a second application for 13 dwellings, which was under consideration by the council, was withdrawn. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 7 on the agenda is the quarterly enforcement report. Rebecca, would you like to present the report to the committee?
Thank you, Chairman. If I could please direct members to page 11 of the report for the site-specific updates. There are 2 site-specific updates for the eastern area, the first being on page 11, Pollingfold Place, Horsham Road and Ellens Green. The breach here is the unauthorised change of use for the stationing of caravans and mobile homes, engineering operations and erection of sheds. Officers have served enforcement notices and there is also an injunction in place on the site. Officers are aware of further developments at the site and we are currently liaising with legal services as to the next course of action. To provide a verbal update to members, officers are shortly due to visit the site and will keep you updated on this. If I could please ask you to now turn over the page to page number 12. The second site is Pitch Hill, Ewhurst. The identified breach here was the unlawful erection of an extension and balcony. We issued an enforcement notice in respect of that breach. Officers visited the site in May 2015 and confirmed compliance with the enforcement notice. The case is due to be removed, therefore, from the report. If I could please now discuss the enforcement statistics on page 14 of the report. Turning to the table at the top of page 14, the summary of caseload, as you will see, the cases on hand for the last quarter, April to June, was 238. The target for cases on hand is 250. This therefore represents a decrease on the previous quarter and is within our target. Looking at the table to the bottom of page 14, the performance against local performance indicator, for the last quarter, April to June, officers actioned 95% of cases within 12 weeks. The target for this is 75%, so this is therefore up on the last quarter and is meeting our target. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Ellis, you have a question.
Thank you. I apologise. I should have asked the officer directly. If I could actually turn to page 16, this is appeals lodged and appeals performance. The land at Gabled Cottage, the Common Cranley, it says hearing. Does that mean a public hearing, and will residents, objectors and the applicants be able to attend that hearing and speak at it? And will also the objections that have already been lodged and obviously the comments from the applicant, can I assume that they will be carried forward to the appeal? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. I can confirm that the appeal is due to proceed on the grounds of a hearing. Third parties and members, local residents, will get the opportunity to make their comments to the planning inspectorates. We have sent notification letters out and that will provide the details for doing so. The comments raised on the current application will not be put forward as part of the appeal process. They will have to write directly to the planning inspectorate for their comments to be taken into account. Thank you.
Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I firstly congratulate the officers on the performance against the local performance indicator, not only for the last couple of years where we've gone up from 89 to 95 and 82 is a year ago, but I mean up to 95% is very impressive. And if we look at figure 2 on the top of page 15, it shows how on the graph we've been steadily improving since January 2012, and that's brilliant. On Pollingfold Place, this clearly has had, for those of us who've been around a bit, this has had a checkered history. Could I ask when we were aware of further developments and some sort of indication of what those further developments are, allegedly? Because I am concerned that if it's a breach of the injunction, that we ought to be acting expeditiously.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Just to provide a bit more clarification on that, the further developments relate to further caravans being brought onto the site. We are aware of that, and we're currently liaising with the legal services how to best proceed, really, in light of the injunction being in place on the land. As I said, verbal update is that officers are shortly due to visit the site and will provide updates. Thank you.
When were we aware of these caravans coming on the site?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think we know exactly to report tonight, Councillor Goodrich, but we can probably come back to you offline if that would be helpful to you. Thank you very much.
So can I confirm that the committee is happy to note the report? Thank you. So on to 8.1, and in the event of site inspections being necessary as a result of considerations of the applications at this meeting, these will be held on Monday the 7th of September 2015, obviously, at a time to be agreed. Moving on to the planning applications. So item A1, WA 20150367, first application. erection of a dwelling and ancillary annex and associated works following demolition of existing outbuildings at land at Munstead, Munstead Heath Road, Godalming, GU8 4AR. Catherine, would you like to introduce the application to the committee, please?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The application site is located to the northwest of Munstead Heath Road, runs here along the bottom of the plan. The site, for those members that didn't attend the site visit, is accessed via an existing 5-bar gate onto the road. There is a public footpath which runs along the southwestern boundary of the site. The site is currently occupied by redundant former chicken sheds which are in a state of disrepair, and these are the 2 grey rectangular buildings located to the southwest of the application site shown here. The proposal is for the erection of a detached dwelling on the site together with a detached lodge building closer to the roadside. The building has been put forward by the applicants as an exceptional new dwelling under the provisions of paragraph 55 of the MPPF. This is an indicative site layout impression of the site. The access would be as existing off Munstead Heath Road here, the lodge building nestled within existing trees down here, and the proposed dwelling laid horizontally across the top of the site here with landscaped gardens to the north. This is a view of the existing site. You have the long shed here along the southwestern boundary with the additional smaller shed here which is further north. As you can see, the site is very well treed within it. This is a CGI picture of the proposed dwelling. The applicant's architect submits that the concept for the new dwelling is to create a singular object-like form that sits within the woodland clearing and describes it as an enigmatic floating box above a fully glazed ground floor space. So it would be 2 stories overall. The ground floor would be glazed, the first floor hidden behind the panels here at first floor. So this is the rear elevation again, showing the 2 stories. The ground levels change here, and there would be basement car parking as well. This is the proposed first floor plan, which would be the enclosed first floor with a walkway garden area surrounding the first floor accommodation. And on the ground floor, there would be pods of residential areas. The lodge building, proposed closer to the road, would follow the form and design of the main building on the site. And here we have the floor plans. This is proposed to be ancillary accommodation and not a separate dwelling in its own right, just for clarity. Before I take members through the determining issues, if I can just direct you to the printed update sheet that you should have before you. There are a couple of amendments to the report. For clarity and the avoidance of doubt, whilst the floor space of the building would be in excess of 1,000 square metres and thus would fall within the definition of a major development for the purposes of the management procedure order, it is not considered to be major development for the purposes of paragraphs 116 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Therefore, it is not necessary to consider the sequential arrangements set out in paragraph 116 with regards to the AOMB. You'll see there is an additional response from the Surrey Hills AOMB Planning Advisor, who has responded to the submitted landscaped visual impact assessment. I shan't read that out for you, it's there for you to read for yourselves. And finally, just picking up on a couple more points, reason for refusal number 2 should be amended to reflect the fact that we are referring to paragraph 115 and not 116 of the MPPF. And finally, if members are minded to disagree with the recommendation of their officers, the application would need to be referred to the Secretary of State under the consultation direction, given that the floor space would be in excess of 1,000 square metres. Taking you back briefly then to the determining issues, the matters of principle and technical judgment before you are obviously the principle of development. The site is located within the Greenbelt, outside of a settlement, and it is in the nationally designated AONB. Issues of housing, land supply and local need, highways and flood risk and drainage are technical matters for members to consider and are the subject of expert advice. Members are being asked to exercise their judgment on a number of matters, namely compliance with Greenbelt policy, the location of the development and the requirements of paragraph 55, the design and impact on landscape character, and whether there are very special circumstances to allow this development to proceed. Paragraph 55 has its roots in the exception tests of the former PPS 7, which was originally introduced in order to allow each generation to have the opportunity to add to the tradition of country houses in the English countryside. In considering the proposals before them, members are reminded not to confuse the tests of paragraph 55, which relates to outstanding and innovative new dwellings in the countryside, with the separate tests of very special circumstances required to outweigh the harm of inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. In the view of officers, whilst the quality of the design of the building is noted, it does not override the objection in principle to the introduction of another new dwelling in an area which benefits from two national landscape designations, namely the Greenbelt and the Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. It is also noted that the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which is the golden thread running through national planning policy, expressly does not apply to development in restricted areas, including the AONB and the Greenbelt. For those reasons, it is considered that the development should not be supported, and the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons set out in the agenda and the amended reason in the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This item is subject to public speaking, and I understand the procedure has been explained to you. And we don't have an objector registered to speak, so please can I invite the supporter, John Pardy, to come down. Oh, you've got the microphone, I'm so sorry. You have 3 minutes from when... No, where you are, sorry. The procedure's changed lately. You have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name's John Pardy. I'm the architect for this scheme. Paragraph 55 of the planning policy framework allows new dwellings to be built on the countryside, provided certain demanding criteria are met. As you are all aware, the bar is, quite rightly, set extremely high. Now, to achieve this, my client assembled an award-winning team, all top of their field in the UK, and an enormous amount of work has gone on in the last 15 months to prove that we've met these. We are aware that councils have in the recent past supported another paragraph 55 development, and we believe this proposal to be of even greater merit. The house is a zero-carbon, contemporary design, inspired by the country house tradition, not copying it. In both its architecture and landscape design, it has received glowing endorsements from some of Britain's preeminent academics, writers and architects on the English country house tradition, as well as the South East Design Review Panel. Excuse me. Accordingly, your officers have acknowledged that the design complies with the national requirements on the first two criteria of paragraph 55. I had a cold last week, sorry. On the third criteria, this states a successful development must significantly enhance its immediate setting. Through the very nature of the project, clearance of non-indigenous planting, removal of large chicken sheds, ongoing restoration of surrounding woodland, and the introduction of a wildflower butterfly meadow, the immediate setting will significantly be enhanced. However, the Council's agreement that it is an outstanding design, we surely think a truly outstanding building would naturally enhance its immediate setting. The fourth criteria, that a development will be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. The site is surrounded by large arts and crafts dwellings set within substantial plots, a characteristic this proposal emulates. Design unashamedly proposes a bold contemporary building which, just like the Lutyens' houses of their time, forms a reciprocal embrace with nature. That's crucial to what country houses do. It aspires to be at the forefront of new architectural design and complementary landscaping in much the same way as Lutyens and Jekyll collaborated to produce country houses that were entirely modern in their day. On this point, neither I nor my client agrees with the officer's assessment about character area and urge members to form their own opinion. Your officers have recommended refusal on grounds of inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. However, we believe that the development meets the more exacting criteria of paragraph 55, and we've demonstrated this through the LVIA that no harm will result, and very special circumstances do exist. In summary, I believe the proposal accords in totality with the planning policy framework, and I ask that you grant permission and allow, as Alain de Botton, writer and philosopher,
If you could just give us one
has
more
commented.
sentence to sum up, please, Mr. Pardee.
I will. He wrote, I believe the house is going to be a building of major historical impact and interest at the end of the 21st century. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pardee. Members, over to you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I decided to ask for this to be brought to the committee because I was looking in some detail at all of the information and representations, etc., on the website, and decided I would wish to view the site prior to actually calling it in, and or asking for it to be called in, and equally to have a good understanding of what was there and what was being proposed, reading through all the documentation. I found bearing in mind the principle that we have in a lot of instances, in fact most instances, is reuse of commercial farm buildings, etc. There's no way clearly that these commercial buildings could ever be reused. They're a blot on the landscape, is an old-fashioned term, and I felt that the proposal as put forward, very modern design, not to everybody's taking, and certainly not something different for us in Waverley, but nevertheless it deserved consideration by the committee, because I believe that the removal of those extensive chicken sheds and proposing a building of less than half the footprint of those buildings in a slightly different position was worthy of strong consideration by ourselves, and I believe that, personally, I believe it's the right thing to do. One of the things that we talk about is the management of our woodland and our areas, and this clearly is something that ought to be done, and this is part of it in taking away these buildings and regenerating the area. I also wanted to look at the aspect of objections from neighbours. Munstead Platt had put quite strong objections forward with regard to overlooking, etc. And so I walked the footpath, as we all did, or most of us did, I think, on our site visit this week, and found that there is, in my view, virtually no opportunity whatsoever to be overlooked or indeed to be disturbed in any way. I also note, and I haven't asked the officers this, so it's an unfair comment in a way, but I decided to print off the Surrey interactive map of the area, and it looks like the lane or the driveway that drives adjacent to that footpath, to Munstead Platt and beyond, I believe, is not on that map, and perhaps is not a legal route through. That the roads that are marked on the map are totally different. So there's so many different arguments, both for and against, and at least the Southeast Design Panel strongly in favour of it, and the Surrey Hills officers obviously clearly against the whole proposal. But I'm not going to even try to consider the fors or against in that sense. I just believe that the changes that will be made and the improvements to that area with removal of those unsightly derelict buildings and the replacement with a modern building which will not be seen from the road or from the footpath, etc., but nevertheless will be a contribution to what we have in the area. The other question I have about the update sheet, and of course we've been, not only have we got a very long report and lots of other things, but we've now got a very long update sheet which is hard to assimilate in such a short period of time. But one of the comments that were made, and I don't know who has put this on, so however, on page 3 it says, however, officers expressed concern that there has been a proliferation of such developments. I would like to understand where that proliferation of such developments has been, because I haven't seen it. We've refused almost all of them. We certainly did pass the one in Ewhurst by this committee many months ago, but other than that, I think proliferation means slightly more than just one or two properties within our area, and I'm not quite sure how many others, of course, have gone into the other 3 areas of Waverley, but I don't believe it's a proliferation. I think that's an exaggeration. So overall, I look forward to hearing what members have to say with regard to this application. I personally, notwithstanding anything new coming up, I believe that it's something that I can support.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you.
So sorry. I believe Elizabeth wants to come back. I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Chairman, if I could just quickly respond to Councillor Byam's comment on our reference to other developments in the area. Just to be clear, maybe proliferation is not the best word, but it was to draw members' attention to the fact that there have been several others, and I would also name Alderbrook as an example, and also going slightly further back in time, Whitley Park was another example, and I believe we also permitted one in the Baynards area in not such distant history. So there have been several, I think, and actually concentrated in the eastern part of the borough. So I just raise that because that needs to be considered in the context of these being quite exceptional grants of permission if they are made, and that caveat in paragraph 55 and its predecessor, PPS 7, what was really to give the opportunity to planning authorities on a very exceptional basis to grant permission for contributions to the country house. And I think the danger is that that the weight to be given to Greenbelt, which is a very high bar, as you know, and indeed AONB, can become slightly lessened by the pressure to promote these schemes because they are of exceptional design, to the point at which perhaps grants of permission don't become exceptional anymore. So I think it was relevant to bring that to members' attention. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I thank the officers for their full report, including the addendum to it, which we received today. And I also thought the site visit was very helpful. We have some very strong policies that cover this site. As has been said, Greenbelt and AONB. And dealing with Greenbelt, to remind members that there is a very strong presumption against a development outside any defined settlement area, against inappropriate development, and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Those listed under paragraph 89 and 90 of the NPPF, the sort of exceptions that might occur, and it's quite clear in my mind that there are no exceptions that apply so far as the green belt is concerned. And I think it's very important that this committee and the Borough Council as a whole should protect its green belt. The other thing is the AONB, and this is a matter of some judgment, but so far as the design is concerned, I hear what others say. Personally, I have differing views. It may be a grand designs type of of building, but it's not one that I think is right in the setting where it is being proposed. And I agree somewhat with the parish council that it's the right house in the wrong place. I know Munstead extremely well, and I know the sort of houses that are in that area, and I don't think this building would enhance its setting at all. When you have these fins, I think they call them, reinforced fins, glass fibre reinforced fins, which apparently are to allow views out but would restrict views in. Well, as nobody's going to see it or nobody's going to look at it, who's going to be looking into that need the fins to be there? But I'm sure it's a design point. But the fact of the matter is that when one looks at the site, and this is where the site visit was helpful, where it's positioned, and one of our planning officers very boldly paced out where this building would be and ran out of room before she'd finished her striding. Yes, there's been a clearance to make it look as if we have a site for a building, and clearly a lot of trees have already come down to make it look as if you have a site, but I suspect far more trees will have to come down, maybe not very valuable trees, to actually fit this building in. And then on top of that, and this includes the lodge as well, and more about that in a moment, they're going to be surrounded by trees. It's going to be dark and there's not going to be much enjoyment in the garden because there's going to be trees all around. So there's going to be great pressure to remove more trees. And I think we need to take a very careful note that when we are removing trees, and it may not be the current applicants that do, but if they sell it, others may do so. The fact that we can't see this building, and I accept you can't see it, I suspect you can see the lodge from the road, or certainly from the top of the water tower. You could probably see quite a bit. But the fact that it is not visible, publicly visible, is not something which should be an argument in favour of this building being erected. Because there's good authority on that this would open a can of worms if you could develop where you liked, provided you public can't see it. We get an awful lot of development in Greenbelt and elsewhere. The other thing that I wanted to make, and it's an integral part of this application, is the lodge. And the lodge is totally surrounded by trees, and I can see the gardener, as intended, I think, as a gardener's lodge. There's going to be very little amenity ground around that, and there's going to be pressure to remove trees for light and so on, which will make it even more likely to be seen from the highway. I am very unhappy about this application. It's totally contrary to the arts and crafts country houses that are in the area. It may be to some, and some eminent people, a very well designed and superb building, but I don't think it's suitable in Munstead, and I don't think overcomes, from my point of view, the Greenbelt policy or the policy of AONB. And subject to what anybody else says, my view at the moment is to go along with the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Are there any other? Sorry, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was going to start by thanking the officers for a clearly argued case with supporting evidence. The late submission of additional information has made the argument slightly less clear, but my understanding of the main issue here remains that the applicant has attempted to make the case for the building of a property with supporting buildings on a large plot of land within the green belt, an area of outstanding natural beauty and an area of great landscape value on the grounds of the main building's architectural merit. The officers point out that the restrictions on building in these circumstances are significant. So if I've understood the statement by the Surrey Hills AONB planning advisor correctly, the requirements that have to be met by the development are significant, and his discussion, in my view, demonstrates that the applicant's case fails to meet these requirements. Of the letters objecting to or supporting the application, the letters of objections are predominantly from local sources, including Busbridge Parish Council, who have to live with the consequences of the development. The letters of support, in contrast, predominantly come from architects who don't live in the district. So I appreciate that the applicant wishes to demonstrate the exceptional merit of the proposed design, but there seems to me that there are enough views expressed stating that the design doesn't reach the hurdle required to be acceptable under the prevailing circumstances. So I end up reaching the same conclusion as the officers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, like all these cases, it is always difficult when we have an application with clearly intriguing, interesting design. But I have some sympathy with the parish council's comments that it's the right house in the wrong place. From my perspective, Waverley has very clear policy guidelines for what might or might not be acceptable in an area of the Green Belt and an area of outstanding natural beauty. And in addition to that, Waverley has also endorsed the Surrey Hills management plan, which sets out some further elaboration, which the Surrey Hills planning consultant has alluded to, referred to rather, in his comments. And I think these are important. And I think we need to judge it in relation to that. And it seems to me architectural merit on its own is not sufficient. And I think that's the crux of the issue. Architectural merit may well be there, like some extent it's a matter of opinion, but I acknowledge the comments from the architectural experts. But to fit in and to make the case unambiguously for a house here, I think there are other things which need to take account, and the issues of the proposed property fitting into the landscape, the colour and nature of the building materials, the extent to which it actually enhances the landscape. I think all of these, from my perspective, are questionable, and I don't really believe that it passes the test because of this. And reluctantly again, because I think this is clearly a very ambitious proposal of a very interesting design. As I say, I come back to where the Busbridge Parish Council came from, when it considers that this is the right house in the wrong place. And so I am also minded to support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Band. Are there any more? Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. It was very good to go on the site visit the other day. I really appreciated that. Thank you very much for a very concise and very full report, and the updates were very useful. Thank you for those. As amazing as the building is, and it is quite an amazing building, it is not sensitive to the environs, and I struggle, and I really struggle with this. I feel very uncomfortable about this. It is an amazing building, but I just don't feel that it is sensitive to its environs, and it is a very special area there. It's a very wooded area, and I do believe that there will be a need for more of the trees to come out. And as we well know, Waverley is one of the most treed areas of the land, and it's quite important to retain this. There are arguments for regeneration, changes, and how matters might outweigh, and the creation of a family house and also a home for a worker. But I'm inclined to go with the officers on this. As I say, as amazing as the building is, I don't think it fits. It's not compatible to the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Any other comments? So now we need to move on then. The recommendation is that permission be refused for the reasons 1 to 2 as amended in the update sheet and informatives 1 to 2 as set out on pages 54 to 55 of the report. May I have those in favour of the recommendation to refuse?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And those against?
That's 1.
And abstentions?
1.
Thank you very much. So recommendation to refuse is agreed. Now we move on to item B1, WA 2015 0041. Item B1, WA 2015 0041, change of use of first floor to sports injury clinic and exercise studio, Class D1, and erection of second floor extension to serve ground floor retail and proposed first floor use. Replacement shop front, installation of air conditioning unit to the rear, and construction of a bike storage facility at 9A Tortoise and Hare Running Limited, High Street, Bramley, GU5 OHF. We have no public speaking on this application. So, Joe, would you please like to introduce the application to the committee?
Thank you, Chairman. This application relates to an existing retail property within the Bramley High Street. This property here, you've got the High Street coming down here. It's located on the eastern side of the street, wholly within the designated conservation area. The conservation area boundary on this area lies along this line here, and it sort of does a few wiggles, but it's essentially well within the conservation area. The property is one of a terrace of 3 properties which share a deep 2-storey flat roof built form. This is the elevation from the High Street, the existing elevation, and this is the elevation to the rear. Members will recall when they went on site visit that actually when you're looking at the rear from the car park, this is the level of the existing rear wall. This is the ridge line, which when you step further back into the High Street you see is actually a sort of a false pitch, a sort of facade to the front elevation. The application proposes the erection of a second floor flat roof extension on one end of the terrace at number 9A to facilitate the provision of additional storage for the retail unit within the new second floor accommodation. It's proposed that the existing floor accommodation will be used as an exercise class room and a treatment room together with associated offices. A replacement shop front is also proposed, and a new bike store and an air conditioning unit is proposed at the rear of the site. 6 parking spaces are also to be provided. I'll just go through the existing floor plans. You'll see that currently there's retail here and there's an office space, and then upstairs is storage and office. This is the proposed new rear elevation. Apologies to members, in the agenda it actually says the High Street, but this is from the rear. As we saw on site, there is no alteration to the front of the elevations onto the High Street apart from the shop front. But this is the proposed elevation from the rear. It's probably easier to see it on a side elevation. So I am standing, this is the High Street on this here. You've got this false pitch at the moment, and at the moment the line is along here. That's the level of the flat roof that exists at the moment as a 2-storey extension. What is proposed is this new hipped back at the rear, but then a flat roof extension on the back with a dormer. So if I go back to that slide, you'll see the dormer, and the elevations are straight up. So it's just the hip is this element only on the rear. As members will recall from the site visit, the proposed extensions are not clearly visible from the high street because they're set behind that existing ridgeline. However, the proposals would be clearly visible from the car park to the rear and from between buildings in Windrush Close. It's understood that the applicant is seeking to expand the business operations at the site and that the proposal would provide a complementary and ancillary function to the ground floor retail use. It's a specialist running shop and sells running shoes and clothing and equipment to go with that. And the facilities proposed on the existing first floor and the new second floor are to provide ancillary facilities to support that existing use. The proposed extension would have a flat roof with a depth of, that depth there is approximately 11 metres, and the additional height from the existing floor here, existing roof here up to this point, which is just level with this, sort of just below the level of the ridge line, is 3.2 metres. The existing property lies on the southern boundary of Windrush House, which has rear-facing habitable windows. The proposal would increase the height of the wall on the boundary with this property by a further 3.2 metres to an overall height of 9.6. Turning to the update sheet, reference is made to additional comments received from the applicant's agents, which have included the request to amend the application to allow a more flexible use of the first and second floor, and a tabled set of plans to provide a mansard roof. For information, the following slides show the proposed mansard. So sorry, they're the proposed floors. So this is the mansard. So you have slight pitch coming away at this level. This remains as a big flat roof, and again you can see the mansard comes up at this point, and it will be pitching away slightly, and that's the revised roof. However, as indicated in the update sheet, the proposed revisions would not overcome officers' concerns in relation to the impact on the conservation area or on the amenities of adjoining occupiers. Furthermore, officers considered that the proposed change of description, which enabled a more multi-purpose use of the existing first floor and just additional space, so rather than actually specifying what the uses were going to be, it was a more flexible arrangement. Officers considered that proposed change of description would represent a material change to the application, such that a fresh application would be required. These plans have therefore not been accepted by officers. In addition to the written update sheet, a further letter from the applicant's agent has been submitted, which in general terms indicates that the proposals are for a viable and creative use of a retail unit, which seeks to maintain a vibrant local economy, seeking to sustain and enhance the significance of the heritage asset, putting them to a viable use consistent with their conservation. The agents contend that the proposal helps to plan positively to beneficially enhance the greenbelt and the conservation area. It's further stated that the applicant's business plan has been to develop a concept shop, adding value to the closed sale business of exercise clothing with associated exercise and treatment activities as a subsidiary activity. Turning to the determined issues, the principle of development and flooding are considered to be matters of principle or technical judgment. Whether the proposal complies with Greenbelt policy, particularly in terms of the impact on the visual amenity of the Greenbelt, and the design and impact of the proposal on the conservation area, a designated heritage asset, are matters of planning judgment. So too is the impact of the proposal on the amenities of neighbours, parking provision, and the displaced retail storage space from the first floor to the second floor. In view of the above, and as indicated on the update sheet, officers recommend that the proposed amendments are not accepted as part of this application, and that subject to the consideration of any further representations received by 13th of August, then permission be refused as set out on the agenda on pages 80 and 81. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. Members, may we have your observations or questions, please? Councillor Goodrich.
I was trying to defer to the local members, but they haven't indicated, so I will. again, the site visit was helpful. And the one thing that, and thank you for the report, the one thing that I'm slightly surprised the officer hasn't mentioned in summarising this is the fact of the planning history of this site, where when we are being asked to give our judgment on the determining issues, the matters of planning judgment, a similar application has already been refused and has been, the appeal has been dismissed. The appeal has been dismissed by the inspectors, and in the officer's view, the proposed application today is very similar to that which has already been refused on appeal. And I think that that's an important factor that should be taken into account, in that the inspector has concluded on the earlier application, and I'd appreciate any guidance, any more guidance on how the two differ. Says the second floor extension has failed to preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, and poor design, and the significant flat roof depth of the proposed would be clearly visible when viewed from within the car park area and the surrounding properties. And also I'm concerned about, and I think the inspector expressed some concern as to the effect on the Windrush property next door. It does seem to me that it's difficult to see on the plans, but this is where the site visit was helpful, that when one sees that plan, you think, oh, that's easy enough, we're just putting in a dormer window, but of course it isn't. It's coming forward by some 30 feet or so from the odd-looking triangle that makes it look acceptable from the high street. And one could see that it would then perhaps be repeated on the middle section if we prove this, but then they'd have a problem on the left hand as you're looking at this plan, because there are windows and other things in the way to prevent it happening. I agree that we should be treating this application on the basis of the application that's before us in our papers and not the amended one, because it is pretty different. And of course that hasn't been to the parish council or hasn't been to the the people we should be consulting, and to come up with something which actually would make it more difficult to develop the middle one, because you're then going to have it sloping away in the middle there. I'm clear in my mind, subject to anything other people should say, that the officers' views are correct. I appreciate that one wants to support a local business, and I would wish to do that, but not at the expense of making it unpleasant for neighbours and giving an extension which is not compatible, in my view, to the green belt and the conservation area. And therefore, I will be voting against as things stand at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. As an initial comment, I'd like to thank the officers for the weight that they've given in the preservation of Bramley's conservation area. The recognition and preservation of village conservation areas are clearly of considerable importance to Waverley. In Bramley's case, however, it is worth being very clear that the conservation area is an envelope which contains many buildings of outstanding architectural and historic merit, and equally many buildings that are post-war and have rather less significant architectural merit. So the proposed extension actually falls in that part of the conservation envelope that doesn't shine with artistic merit or historical outstanding buildings. That doesn't in any way excuse inappropriate or excessive design extensions, but I would suggest it lessens the need for alterations to be totally sympathetic to the older buildings in the area. I believe that the office's recommendation that we only consider the original application without the expanded flexibility of use or the mansard roof is correct. So assuming that to be so, this particular application raises two questions in my mind, the answer to each of which is a question of weight rather than hard and fast rules. So does the proposed addition of a limited second floor extension significantly impact the conservation area? And will failure to grant this application have an impact on commercial activity in Bramley High Street? So if I can refer to a statement in the officer's submission on page 71, repeated on page 72, the submission states, paragraph 133 of the MPPF states that where development will lead to substantial harm or total loss of significance of a dedicated heritage asset, local or planning authorities should refuse consent unless it can be demonstrated that the substantial harm or loss is necessary to achieve substantial public benefits that outweigh the harm or the loss. We've seen in the course of our site visit that whether the second floor extension harms the conservation area or not is a matter of personal perception. And even if the perception is that harm will be done, I'd argue that it's scarcely substantial. On the other hand, whilst the officers acknowledge that enabling the business to grow will have benefits, it is my view that it's not given enough weight. Bramley currently has 4 empty commercial properties in the high street, and a 5th is in the process of being converted from commercial to domestic use. This constitutes approximately 20% of the shops in the village. So Bramley clearly has an issue with retaining successful businesses, and a failure to support business development where appropriate through the planning process has the potential to make matters worse. So in conclusion, it's my contention that for the best of reasons, the officers have got the balance of their assessment wrong. I don't believe that the proposed plans do significant harm to the conservation area, but I do believe that failure to support this application will prevent the growth of a business that enhances Bramley's struggling high street scene. So for these reasons, I consider that the officer's decision to decline permission should not be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if you asked most of our people who live in the village what they think of the high street, they generally love it. But then couldn't we change those buildings because they look so awful and out of place, because the traditional old buildings were knocked down I don't know how many years ago, well before I came here. But nevertheless, it's not an attractive building from the front or the rear. And indeed the people who live around that area, and we've asked some of the people who actually look out onto that space, and they're not perturbed in any way whatsoever with the proposal for this development. And we haven't got any representation on that. The parish council do support this application. Councillor Seaborn talked about the empty shops. Some years ago we were very concerned as a parish with regard to loss of business to Smithbrook Kilns, 3 or 4 miles down the road. And very happily, some of those businesses have moved into the high street, and this is one of them. They were at Smithbrook Kilns and they moved here, and one of the dress shops that is in the high street, the only dress shop actually in the high street, also moved from Smithbrook Kilns. So they obviously believe that the high street is the right place to be, and I believe that its growth here is good. It is the right thing to do. It's a strange building. That back view, I think, in many ways, and indeed, as Councillor Goodrich, I think, said, if we could do the whole lot, it would make the whole building look better. The only fly in the ointment there, in terms of the adjacent building to the left, as we look at it there, is that there is a window. I don't know what it supports, but there is a window looking out over that flat roof. So the other thing is that as a parish, we've always been very strong on supporting our conservation area, and indeed had it, I think at our instigation, extended in the last year or so. So we extended it because we believe that there's more there that ought to be included. And there are a number of places on the high street where we have objected. In fact, in a couple of cases lost, where we were trying to survive, keep special brick walls, etc. we turned it down and we lost at appeal. So we haven't always been successful, but it was the officers themselves, I think, have supported the view to maintain one or two things that I'm thinking of, and it wasn't supported by the inspectors. So overall, I believe that it's the right thing to do. It's a business which clearly has a vision and an aspiration to grow, and if they can grow within this space as it stands there and stay within Bramley, I think they should be supported. And I don't think in any way it detracts from the conservation area. That looking at that area, the conservation area, it doesn't look. And I'm not quite sure whether Councillor Goodrich is talking about his view about looking at the flat roof, or whether somebody else has said that. But if you look at that flat roof, you've got to be in a pretty high helicopter to see it, because there's no other buildings which are above that height, and therefore the flat roof will not be seen, and therefore it's an inconsequence in that you've got the sloping roof, this both front and back of the building. So I'm willing to propose that we grant permission.
Thank you, Councillor Byam. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to admit that when I first looked through the agenda and the report, and I thank the officers for this, I was actually minded to go against the officers' recommendation, and that was based really on a keenness on my part to support local businesses and to encourage local employment opportunities. And I would suggest that particularly in Bramley, where they have a constant problem with traffic, with many people driving to work, it would be nice to have employment opportunities in the local high street. I was also minded, because I do pay a great deal of attention to the comments from Bramley Parish Council, and I think they're very important, as are comments from other parish councils relative to their applications in their part of the borough. However, I have looked at this, and I took further note of the comments regarding the refusal by the inspector to a previous application, and I also, although unfortunately I wasn't able to go on the site visit, I do obviously know the area quite well, and I have looked at it, and I do think that the alterations to this property by putting on another floor would actually have an impact on the conservation area and on the other properties. So I'm sorry to say, because I would like to support a local business, that I don't think that excuse me, the alterations into the building in this way are appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe officer wants to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. I just thought it would be useful to explain perhaps what the appeal proposal that Councillor Goodrich was referring to. There was a proposal for the first floor and the second floor. Again, it had different tiles. It had cedar shingle, I think, on the side elevations. But there was also a two-storey extension off the back. Obviously, that element has been taken off, but there was still the first floor, the second floor proposal. So, you know, it is a similar proposal, albeit that this, let's say, the two-storey extension has come off. So, just for clarification.
Thank you, Joe. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, I think thank the officers for organising the site visit. Is quite helpful and an interesting report. It's not a very lovely building from the back, in particular, is it? I mean, it's an extraordinary sort of false pitch roof from the view from the front. And you do wonder really what real harm is being done by doing something which looks entirely logical, which is completing that second floor, recognising, although on the other side, that it will have an impact on the neighbouring properties. But the neighbouring properties are all that sort of height. I know they're there first, but does it really impact on the overall aspects of the conservation area? So it's quite difficult, I think. I think also the issue of supporting local businesses is important. I just wonder whether other members would go along with what the officer was suggesting, is that perhaps we should defer this and wait for them to come and look at the amendments to have been proposed before we consider the new issues which have been brought forward. I mean, I don't know whether other people have considered doing that, because it seems to me there are some potential improvements, but also some complications of these amendments which have been put forward, which we can't really determine, rightly can't really determine now. But if they were to make this more acceptable, would the right course of action to be to defer considering this application until officers have had the opportunity of properly considering and consulting on the proposed amendments? I don't know what other members of the committee think.
Thank you, Councillor Bann. Councillor Stennett.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I could support Councillor Bann's proposal there. I think that's a good idea. I'm in favour of jobs. I don't think that roof is anyway detrimental to the area. It's a shame we can't do the whole thing, and bearing in mind that Waverley would have given permission for that building in the first place. So I think we should wait for further information in view of that we need jobs, we need opportunities for business, and we need work in Bramley High Street, and the parish council are for it. So I think that's a very good proposal from Councillor Bann. Thank you.
Councillor Bann, do you wish to come back on that?
Yeah, can we then, I then formally propose that we defer considering of this application at the moment and await further consideration of the revised application and report coming from officers in due course.
Yes.
I seem to have a seconder.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just comment on that, Councillor Bann. I think what we would be asking you to do then, before resolving to defer it, to consider the amendment, to resolve to accept the amendments to the application. Obviously, our recommendation is that you don't accept them, but it is your judgment. So in which case, if you wish to consider those, in the first instance, you would be resolving to accept the amendments to the application, then deferring the application to allow us to carry out the consultation, amend the description, make the assessment, and then bring it back to you at a future committee meeting. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Chairman, I'm happy to accept that advice and propose accordingly. And I seem to have a seconder.
Well, I think before we go on to that, Councillor Bann, Councillor Goodrich needed to come back.
Well, two things. Firstly was the point that Mrs Sims has mentioned, that I had understood the officers to take the view that this amendment was so different from the original application that it really was more than an amendment and should be treated as a separate application, which is why I was slightly concerned. But if we can get round that by saying that this should be treated as an amendment, then clearly if we can get over that hurdle, then I'm happy to consider an application that is probably better than the one we've got in front of us. And the second thing I wanted to mention, when I was talking about the flat roof, yes, of course you can't see the flat roof from the ground, but you can see the contours of it from the side when you're going up the side road, and it will be, in my view, and I'd be interested to see what it's going to look like when it's slightly mansarded. It's going to be a very big, lot of brickwork, the side elevation, 9.6 metres, I think, a lot of which can be seen from the side. That's what worries me in a conservation area. But it may be with slightly different materials, when it comes to the top floor, it might break it up. I don't know.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do, I think, now is go on to the recommendation noted in the update sheet. So if we take the first recommendation first and see where we go with that. And that's, please may I have those in favour? You're looking at me in a puzzled way.
just defer, Chairman, to you and your officer's advice, but I thought in proposing amendment, we ought to be voting on the amendment first before we move on to the substantive recommendation in this report.
That's precisely what we're doing.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Please may I have those in favour that the proposed amendments tabled by the applicant should not be accepted as part of this application. So we need to know those in favour that the proposed amendments tabled by the applicant should not be accepted as part of this application. Can I see those in favour? One. Oh, did you?
I must admit, I'm totally confused here.
You've
we haven't had a comment back from the officers yet as to whether they. I can understand very clearly why they could not bring this into consideration. It was such a late amendment that there was no way that we could make the consideration, and it hasn't been considered by anybody else. So, I thought we were going to not to throw that out, because otherwise, then you're just forcing us then to refuse the whole application anyway, which is not what was being proposed.
Yes, Elizabeth, you can give us an explanation.
I think we're on the same route, Councillor Byam. It's just that the revised recommendation, point 1, enables you to take on board the point as to whether or not you want to accept this amendment. So if you proceed to vote on that, as you've just been about to, you would come to the conclusion whether or not you agree with us that the amendment shouldn't be accepted. If you disagree with us, you're implicitly, I presume, going to then vote for the opposite, that they are accepted. At that point, I suggest rather than, I suppose you'd need to go to the second recommendation, straight to deferral. Yeah, thank you.
So now, we are voting as to whether we are in favour of the proposed amendment, that it should not be accepted as part of this application. So what I want you to indicate is whether you are in favour of this amendment not being accepted. Councillor Stennett.
My nickname's the Common Digger Driver. Now, I'm totally and absolutely confused. I'm sorry for my ignorance. Why can't we just go straight for a deferral?
Well, could you switch your microphone off, please, Elizabeth?
The point is, Councillor Stennett, if you're looking for the officers to go away and register the amendment, reconsult on it as an amendment to this application, which we have indicated to the applicants shouldn't happen because we think it's too much of a change, but the committee have indicated they would like that to happen. By agreeing this point, that you would like it to be accepted as an amendment, you're instructing us to go away and carry out that amendment. So we were nearly there in that I think the committee decided they didn't agree with point 1 and the opposite was going to get voted on. I think that you are instructing us to take it as an amendment. Thank you.
So, sorry, can I come back? Just to be perfectly clear, we're not voting for a refusal of the application. Thank you very much.
So now Vice Chairman would like to offer his pearls of wisdom, I think.
Not necessarily, Chairman, but I wonder whether a better way forward, and I do believe perhaps that the applicant may be in the public gallery here, whether or not they might wish to withdraw their current application on the agenda here and resubmit an amended application with the mansard roof. Would that be a way forward?
Elizabeth, if you want to come back on that, but I'm advised that we don't think we can do that.
Chairman, may I make an amended recommendation from the officers that the committee resolved to defer this application and accept the amendments as part of this application. Chairman.
Thank you. You came to the rescue, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. I have asked the public gallery not to applaud, and I'm going to ask the committee not to as well. It was quite clear to me, which may come as a surprise to you, as to what we were being asked to do. I just read the revised recommendation on the amendment update, and it seemed perfectly clear. But I think now what we're going to do... Okay with that? So we will just...
Take a vote on deferring with the proposed.
Okay, so now we're going to... I'd like an indication, please, of who supports a deferral, which is really the... it means you're not going to accept the... You are going to accept the update sheet
So those
details. So those in favour of a deferral, please. So that is unanimous, and so there's no need to go any further with that. I don't think. Councillor Goodrich.
Madam Chairman, when it comes back, could I ask that we have some indication in our report about what the plans were for the refused on appeal application, because I think if it is fundamentally different with extra few floor, extension on the back, that might have some bearing. I'd understood that there was very little difference between the two. Now, I would just like to know the facts there, because I think it is significant that an inspector has refused an appeal, and I don't want to be misled as to what he was refusing.
I think, Chairman, we'll include the previous plans for members' information as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we have got somewhere with that, thank goodness. And so, as there are no items to consider in exempt, that concludes the meeting this evening. Thank you, members.